The Constitution. Constitutional historian Charles Beard, in his An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, argued that the Founding Fathers were concerned with protecting the wealth of the propertied class. He painted a picture of the delegates to the convention as men who were wealthy and who cared about the financial interests of that class. The compromises reached at the convention included voting, representation, slavery, and trade. Because wealth was such an important consideration, the delegates decided to let the individual states determine the criteria for voter qualification. Property became the major criterion, and each state was able to determine who was eligible to vote in the national elections for Congress and the President. The thorny issue of how to create a new Congress split the convention between the larger, more populous states and the smaller states. The smaller states, led by New Jersey, insisted that each state should have equal representation. The Virginia plan argued that a legislation based on population would be more equitable. The Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise, resulted in the formation of a bicameral or two-house Congress. One house is represented equally by the states, or the Senate, and the other house is represented by population, the House of Representatives. Once the structure of the new Congress was agreed upon, the divisive issue of slavery had to be resolved. There was never a doubt that Jefferson's original proposition that all men are created equal would never see the light of day in the new Constitution. Nevertheless, the issues of slave trade and slave representation had to be resolved. The South agreed to halt the import of slaves in 1808 if the North agreed to return fugitive slaves. More difficult was the issue of representation. If each slave counted as one person, the South would have easily held the balance of power in the House of Representatives. Thus, the 3/5 compromise was agreed upon. Every fifth slave would count as 3 persons for representation of tax purposes. The last major compromise dealt with tariffs. The North wanted to tax Southern exports to Europe and wanted to protect their own manufactured goods. The South did not want to tax European goods so that their own exports would not be taxed. They agreed to tax only imports. The delegates also addressed the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Because a primary concern was protection of the property owner, they dealt with economic issues. Congress was given the power to tax, regulate interstate and foreign commerce, create a viable national currency, and in what later became known as the Elastic Clause, make all necessary and proper laws to carry out the stated powers of Congress. States were strictly prohibited from duplicating the powers of the federal government that would have an impact on the nation's economy. For example, they were denied the power to coin money, regulate interstate and foreign commerce, and interfere with the federal government's ability to collect debts. The drafters also saw the need for a chief executive and a court system. However, as we shall soon see, the relationship between these two branches of government became the benchmark of the new Constitution.